BRUCAST is back, baby.
This BRUCAST episode is brought to you by the BRUCAST Store. Explore a store filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BRUCAST. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Visit now brew-cast.com/store. Link below.
BRUCAST is back, baby. Feel the rhythm shake. Hear the guitar wailing. Let the music break.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to another BRUCAST episode. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. BRUCAST also on Instagram, X, and TikTok, where I upload shorts with the highlights of the show. So follow now, BRUCAST on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Links on the description below. You know what? It's giveaway time again. Yeah, BRUCAST fans, how are you doing, my friends? We already gave one BRUCAST cap, and it was a huge success, the giveaway, so we're doing it again. So listen up. We're giving away, again, this limited edition BRUCAST cap that you can only win through the giveaway on the channel. And all you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's that easy. You'll be then running to win this awesome cap. But don't wait too long. Subscribe now because this giveaway won't last forever. So we'll be announcing the lucky winner of this awesome cap at the end of January 2025. So stay tuned. Good luck to everyone. And thanks again for being such an amazing part of the BRUCAST community. And once again, subscribed. Our guest today is Dr. Mala. Dr. Mala is a psychologist and coach specializing in military, family, and trauma psychology, with experience working with diverse populations, including Native communities and the LGBTQ community. All right, Dr. Mala, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. So, gosh, I love psychology because first, I don't understand anything about it. It's so important. It's like how we react so many stuff, and we don't even know about it. So, you can tell me more about it. So, how did you got interested on psychology?
Oh, yeah, that's a great story. So, I mean, my beginnings as a child, I used to say, I want to become a doctor. And I always thought that my track was going to be medically based. And I got accepted into a medical program. It was an accelerated medical program, the whole deal. And I was starting to make rounds with patients. And then I got pulled aside and I essentially got in trouble because my supervisor at the time was like, you can't be in the room talking to your patients longer than 5 minutes. I mean, 5 minutes is even long, right? And I started to feel really uncomfortable because my knee-jerk reaction to that was, how am I going to treat somebody I don't know, right? How am I going to connect with them to get them the right treatment if I can't talk to them and get to know them and establish a rapport? So it was really craving that, in-depth insight to the person that was sitting in front of me and being able to establish a good connection with that person to be able to treat them effectively. And that was 100%, at the time, especially not encouraged. So I felt lost. And then I happened upon a biopsychology and cognitive sciences class, which is essentially the study of biology and the mind and how you think and how all of the functions, come together to work for us as humans, and even the evolution of that, and so much more. But I really got so excited when I took that class because I was like, this is everything that I love. It's, studying the mind. It's looking at the biology of it. It's looking at how it comes through our cognition and how cognition works. And I just felt like, a person in heaven, basically. So I went with it. And then, as those studies continued, I said to myself, well, I really, really, really want to focus on being able to work with everybody in a family unit, and marriages. And so I specialized and went and did my master's in marriage and family psychology. And then I said, well, I want to open that up even more, and I want to work with diversified populations. I want to, just do all like the catch-all of psychology, and went for my counseling, educational, and clinical background, or education in psychology, with a whole bunch of different subspecialties and minors, so that I could continue to diversify my background, and reach more people, because that essentially has been my mission in my work throughout my years of doing this, over 20 years now. My goal has always been to be able to reach the masses and to help them, in any way that I could, not just through one-on-one services, but in other ways as well. And I'm sure we'll get into that. So that's basically my story in a nutshell.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a very noble goal. So if I understand correctly, you specialized in talk psychology. Is that the correct term?
So yeah, I mean, you could, yes, one-on-one psychology, where you're talking to people, connecting with people. Absolutely. That's what we're focusing on. Yeah.
And you mentioned that at some point in time, this was not an encouraged thing.
Not in the medical program that I was
Wow.
in. So, on track, like I said, I was on track to become an MD. And at the time, the concept of spending like an hour in with your patient to get to know them and do an intake and all of that, it just wasn't done. It wasn't encouraged. And we didn't have as much emphasis on fields of medicine like functional medicine or integrated medicine, where those fields really focus on stopping, sitting to get to know the person who's sitting across from you, to be able to treat them holistically. It just wasn't done with any prominence back then when I was in school. And so that's why I just, I was like, I can't be in a program that discourages spending time with the person that I'm essentially trying to help. So, yeah.
Wow. So back when you're studying, the idea of spending about an hour talking with the person you're trying to help was never heard before.
Not in the field of medicine, no.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And when it became widely popular, or I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but because nowadays it's a normal thing. You go to the psychologist, spend like 45 minutes, 1 hour, and it helps you. Like, we know that. So when this transition happened, what it became acceptable to do that, people realized it was actually worth it.
Yeah, I mean, the field of psychology, unfortunately, has gone through a really bad rap for a very long time.
Wow.
We early on, like so many hundreds of years, we have fought the stigma not only of mental health, but also those who treat mental health conditions, because of the way it used to be done. And the way it used to be treated was honestly barbaric, in my opinion. And there's so many different practices that were just wrong, that re-emphasized and emphasized even more, just the stigma with mental health. So, you can see through the history that when whatever problem, even if it was arguably a medical issue, let alone an issue with the mind, it wasn't something that society wanted to talk about. And so if there were problems of the mind, then that was really, really just a hush hush, you don't want to share it, or, like situation that basically was like embarrassing for people. So we, as a treatment, of the mind, and what was created as the treatment for the mind was so horrible. I mean, we had asylums that were utilizing really horrible practices. And I'm not going to go into that now, but I could if you want me to later, just horrible practices that really stigmatize the field. And so as a result, dealing with that, really, even when I was growing up and coming into the field of psychology and saying like, oh, I think I'm interested in this, my own parents were like, wait a second, like, are you okay? Is everything, and of course there are different things that I had experienced in my life that also made me stop and think like, wait a second, no, what I really want to do is process things. I want to talk about them, and that just, it wasn't done, so, and the treatment of the patient as well as the patient, both, I would say both tracks as a person with lived experience and a professional in the field, both were very stigmatized, especially even when I was growing up. So like I mentioned, my parents were like, wait a second, we hope you won't become, afflicted mentally by becoming a psychologist or somebody in this field, because that also was part of the stigma, that if you become a provider, that you will also, because of all the things that you're hearing and you're exposed to, you will also have mental health issues. And that was a concern societally. So I had to break through all of those stigmas. And I would say, and we've seen this even in the textbooks that I've utilized to teach my classes as a professor, in the 90s, in the early 90s, we started to see a transition towards destigmatizing mental health. And that definitely happened with the help of media. So we see shows like Frasier, coming into the forefront. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Frasier is a show that literally the main character is a psychiatrist and his brother is a psychiatrist. And, they're destigmatizing mental health by having a talk show. I would say even like a radio show, which is like the earliest form of podcast, in the 90s, let's say, where they were talking about mental health issues and making it okay to talk about mental health issues. And that kind of started a new era. And I would say arguably that from the 90s on, we've been on a beautiful trajectory and track to really breaking that stigma, talking about mental health. And there's been more freedom in doing that because we're doing it, worldwide. So yeah, and there was acceptance to talk through it.
Wow, I had no idea about any of this. This is so interesting, and we as humans, like that's so the whole stigma is, in my mind, feels a little bit irrational because people knew that talking about your problems in some way or the other would alleviate the pain of it. Because if you look at churches, like they had those, I think it's called confessionary. You'd go and talk to the priest in the church and you would feel better about it. Like there's something behind it, there's something logical to it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I always say this also to my students is that, you'll walk into a math class and they'll say, this is something that you're going to use in your everyday life and it's applicable and et cetera. And it is, I'm not saying it's not, but I can't remember the last time I used an algebraic equation, in my day-to-day life. Psychology actually lives up to that statement of you're going to use this in your daily life. You are, because psychology is the study of your mind, of your brain, and guess what? You're using your brain every day, all day long. And you're dealing with a lot of things in the world, and that's all psychology. So it truly is applicable to your everyday life.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about some certain specific groups, and I wanted to tackle one that I think it's very interesting. It's like the military, the veterans. Apparently, most of them, not I don't know the numbers, but a lot of them, they have PTSD, right? When they come back from war, they live through all the traumatizing events. And one of the things that you address in your practice is PTSD. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, especially within military populations, is something that's very important to talk about and often misunderstood. It's an issue that affects countless numbers of active duty and veteran members, and really understanding its impact and the causes and available treatments is essential for anyone who wants to support those who serve. So when we talk about PTSD in military populations, we're often dealing with complex trauma. And unlike a single traumatic event, complex trauma often arises from repeated exposures to life-threatening situations or situations that are just not good. And that, of course, as we know, happens in military contexts. So there's combat experiences, witnessing loss, the high stakes environment that military members and dependents, so their family members, operate in, can lead to that prolonged, just chronic stress. And so over time, if your stress mechanism is on all the time, you are going to be more prone to having persistent symptoms like flashbacks and hypervigilance, irritability, emotional numbness. That's all stuff that you've got to deal with when you're in. So it's a really important issue. And, one aspect of PTSD that we're beginning to understand more about is something called moral injury. And moral injury refers to the psychological distress that comes from actions in combat that violate a person's moral or ethical beliefs as well. And this is something that military members may experience when they feel guilt or shame related to their role in certain events or decisions. It doesn't always present itself in the same way as other PTSD symptoms, but it can deeply impact a person's sense of self-worth and make integration into the civilian life once they're done even more challenging. So yeah, there's a lot that this population works through, has to deal with, like I said, from PTSD all the way to the moral injury aspects of what they've encountered.
Gosh. I mean,
Yeah.
regarding the moral injury, I guess if you decide to work through the military, I mean, if you get enlisted and if you pursue this path, I mean, you're gonna kill people, right? That's just what you signed for, basically, and it's kind of it doesn't matter what kind of moral you have. It's very unfair, if you ask me. The whole thing, the whole war system is like unfair, of course. So how do we deal with that? Like I'm not part of the military. I'm not, but like you sit with them and you talk about the traumas, and just by talking about it, like alleviates the symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, for treatment, there are several effective approaches, including trauma-focused
Trauma
therapies.
focused.
Yeah, there's also eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or otherwise known as EMDR. You might have heard of that. There's also CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, also very widely and effectively used. And those are just examples of therapies that can help individuals process and reframe traumatic memories, because that becomes a huge part of our goal when we're working with them in session. But it's also vital that we look to trauma-informed care. And what does that mean? That means providing an environment that feels safe and supportive for somebody who's gone through these experiences. So really, and that's, like a specialization that people can get if you're going into therapy or a counselor, is to get trauma-informed care specializations. So in addition to traditional therapy, though, there's other aspects of support like peer support, community programs, both of which can make a really significant difference, because one of the things that we say in the rehabilitative community and the recovery community is that a sense of community, a sense of connection really helps with healing when you're ready for it, One of the biggest challenges for military members with PTSD is feeling isolated or misunderstood, and being part of a group, again, when they're ready, that understands their unique experiences can really help them with reconnecting and reducing those feelings of isolation, helping them finding a new sense of belonging. Because that's the other thing that happens is you can go through your service, you're already part of a community, part of kind of this isolated bubble of the military, which is its own little world. And then when you're out of the military, you got to find that all over again. And there's often a loss of a sense of belonging, because you really very significantly belong to something when you were in, right? And then when you come out, a lot of the times it's like, wait a second, what do I belong to? You know, what's my purpose now? So, so that sense of community, sense of connection really helps with reinventing and redefining a sense of belonging. But it's also important to talk about the fact that everyone who serves doesn't necessarily come out with PTSD. But for those who do, we need to continue to break down the stigma to finding help, and helping them find help. So a lot of the times, again, military mentality is my whole goal is to serve. I have to be able to be in active duty. So if there's an injury, whether it's mentally or physically, the goal is return to duty, return to duty, return to duty. So whatever needs to happen to patch you up and get you back into service becomes a really big part of the focus, which of course, as a provider, that makes me shudder because there's so many things that you have to do. Sometimes it's not going to just be like this instant fix, right? And more often than not, it's not going to be an instant fix.
Is there like, I can totally see how the community serves a huge purpose. I mean, look at Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, just by being in that community, like they get so much support and energy to like get out of the problem. So, is there any type of I don't know, military PTSD Veterans Anonymous?
Yeah, well,
Is there okay?
there's through the VA, there's a lot of different groups and services that are available. There are crisis lines, of course, as well. And there's a lot more that's accessible than I think people like to admit to sometimes. but that's kind of what I was getting at, is that when you're in the military, because of that mentality of I've got to return to duty, my whole life is my duty, there's this kind of overarching feeling and sense of I can't ask for help. Asking for help means that I can't do. So that somehow then makes me less worthy. And there's that stigma that just gets reinforced that I'm not strong enough or I'm not stoic enough to be able to handle life. So oftentimes, again, when you're coming out of the military, many people will feel not only that loss of connection and sense of belonging, but then it's still that stigma to ask for help, right, is a big deal. It's still something that people face. So
really, because I would imagine that when you're in the military, I never I never went to the military, but I would imagine that you rely on your buddies. That's the whole thing. You have your buddies there. I see that on movies, like, oh no, he died, my buddy died. Like they're always relying on each other. So that's not the case.
They definitely rely on each other. There's a sense of camaraderie. There's a sense of belonging. But if you are afflicted in any way, again, mentally or physically, right, there is a stigma that people have to face with having a diagnosis of any kind. Okay. Because if you can't perform, you can't serve. And if you can't serve, then what's your purpose? That's the thought process, right? What am I worth if I cannot serve properly, right? And there's a lot that happens inside the military that reinforces kind of that thought process, which is also where, from a psychological standpoint, and also as a civilian coming in to, provide services for military people, the good news is as us being civilians, who do provide treatment, myself and others, we get to be outside of that bubble. So transitioning them and also saying, no, it's okay. You need your mental, physical affliction. We can work through it and you can heal, and healing and that healing journey is okay. It's really important for them to hear that, because there's so much that goes on that's equated to your sense of worth, right? your self-esteem gets tied into that if you can't perform while you're in,
I
right?
see.
So coming out of the military, when service is done, right, that same mentality of if I'm asking for help, then I'm lesser than, right? Or I might not be able to prove my worth is a narrative, right, that a lot of people end up facing. And that's not just in the military. I'm just going to say that, right? Like there is part of the stigma that we face as a society is exactly that, that if I cannot perform, if I have issues, then how worthy am I? Am I going to be able to produce anything? And does that make me good? Like, or bad or whatever, like there is a stigma that we face societally and definitely in the military populations where asking for help is a challenge because of that. So one of the messages that I really like to reinforce is no, 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 no. Asking for help, seeking support, finding connection, these are all steps that require bravery and reinforce your sense of bravery. And also, it's the first step when you first ask towards your own healing, which is going to actually allow you to be who you want to be, right? So that's a necessary, important step. And that's empowerment that you can give to yourself. So give it to yourself.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I can totally see many bosses that I like. I used to watch Gordon Ramsay a lot, the TV show Hell's Kitchen, right? And there were so many like bosses or restaurant owners. They would just try to do everything, and supervise everything. And I would imagine there's some type of correlation between the mindsets here. It's like they attach all of their value on how much they can support, how much they can do, and how much they are not delegating. I assume there's some type of correlation there. You correct me if I'm wrong, but because in the military, like you're supposed to be the tough guy, right? You learn how to be tough, and if you're tough, you're not like letting other people do things that you can do. Like you're strong. So I can totally see how this become an issue after you went to war, you develop PTSD, and now you need help. I'm gonna look for help. No, I'm weak if I look for help. But there's some things that like you do need help. I think I watched the movie from the Steve Jobs movie. Yeah, it was so good. He said he was like in many ways an asshole, but he knew the things he was not capable of doing by himself. He was very good at delegating, and that's like quality. It's a quality that it seems that you need to learn, and therapy is a way to learning it.
Yeah, I mean, the question that I think is really important for everyone to ask themselves is how big is our us? My us, right? How big is my us? Who do you want to have in your innermost nucleus, in your next level out, your next level out, your next, all the way out to your community, all the way out to the world? Like, how are you defining that for yourself? And who do you want? Because whoever is part of my us, my most immediate nucleus, those are the people that I'm closest to. Those are the people that I lean on for support and who can lean on me for support. Those are my people, right? So how big do you want your us to be, and who's included in that? That's a question that I think everybody should explore and think about.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people think about it. I never thought about. So what was the question again? Could you repeat, please?
How big is your us?
How big is your us? All right, guys, question that. That sounds healthy. Just to give a little bit of context to everyone listening, PTSD. Let's see. It's like the PTSD among U.S. combat veterans ranges from about 2 to 17% of all the veterans. So it's not nothing. And lifetime prevalence about 6 to 31%. So what that's telling me is that can acquire PTSD and never like get rid of it?
Yeah. So here's the thing that I'm going to say. Whether it's PTSD, depression, anxiety, addiction, like once your brain learns that it can respond in a way that creates those symptoms, that means that you're always going to be navigating through that in some way, shape, or form. Okay. So even if you do the work and your PTSD symptoms are quieter, that doesn't mean that there won't ever be a moment in the future where they show up again, or some things happen and maybe now the depression is a little bit higher, maybe now the anxiety is a little bit higher, whatever, like there's always the possibility of symptoms kind of creeping back in, because for the mere reason, the biological reason that your brain has learned that as a response mechanism to whatever, to any trigger, right? So I always caution people, it's not, you never want to think about it as like, oh, I'm cured, like even when we look at things like cancer, like one of the things that happens is what? You might be in remission, right? But then what happens? You go back for checks and rechecks to make sure that the body hasn't veered back towards those, having those cancer cells, and having another situation with or bout with cancer. It's always a possibility, right? So just like that, physiologically, right? Emotionally, mentally, the symptoms that you encounter will vary in intensity, and you may get a good, handle of it all, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be gone, right? So there's always some amount of maintenance and work that you have to do to be able to work through whatever the diagnosis is, okay? So I like to say lifetime prevalence, not to be intimidating, but to empower and say, it's okay. We just have to navigate the path one step at a time, and remember our tools that you've learned that work for you. Or if you don't have tools, or the tools that you have need to be reinforced or reinvented in some way, then let's do that. But just take it one step at a time, and don't put the pressure on yourself of like, I have to be cured. Like that's not going to help either with the pressure. So just take it one step at a time. And yeah, there is what I would argue to be a lifetime prevalence, just because we have to do that ongoing work and maintenance.
I see. All right. So, Dr. Mal, what do you say about mushrooms? What I mean by that, I saw on Instagram, so it's definitely real. It's 100% real. I saw that there's some mushroom therapies out there that can cure PTSD and depression. I don't know how much of this is true. I don't know how much of this has been studied. And have you heard anything about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a big thing. It's growing now. Like the world of psychedelics is something that has really gained a lot of traction and a lot of interest. There's definite momentum, both in scientific research and in public interest. And there's a lot of studies now that show how promising results can be in using substances like psilocybin or ketamine, even mushrooms, what have you. And what I always say is that these treatments are still being studied and regulated, right? They're definitely beginning to transform our understanding of alternative treatment approaches, and even understanding the diagnoses that they're being used to treat. But we want to be careful, okay? There's a lot of evidence that needs to be built into it. And just like any other therapeutic modality, it might not be for everybody, So just be very, very careful. Just like traditional therapies like CBT that I mentioned earlier, or EMDR, they've helped many people. Not everyone responds to those methods. So we have to consider the person holistically. And when it comes to something like complex trauma, psychedelics can definitely offer a new therapeutic avenue by opening up different pathways in the brain, and under guided conditions allow them to access and process traumatic memories in a very safe and supportive setting. So it can definitely help and work. And what you're talking about, so mushrooms, psilocybin, it's showing potential, and particularly for treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, which often co-occur with PTSD. And a lot of the research is suggesting that psilocybin can help individuals with that reframing, restructuring of experiences to help them with gaining a new perspective, which can be particularly helpful for people who are feeling stuck in trauma. I think what's really interesting about psychedelics like psilocybin is that they tend to create a sense of interconnectedness and emotional openness that can foster healing in a way that sometimes some people cannot establish well in traditional talk therapy, whether it's for their own limitations or maybe because they haven't found the right therapist or whatever. But just as I say that, it's really, really important to note that it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And it's not just about the substance, it's about the process, the therapeutic.
Okay, we're back, but we lost Dr. Mala. Let's try to bring her back. Hi, Dr. Mala. We lost connection. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I think we're back. So
Okay.
we were talking about how it's not a size fit all mushrooms.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's not just about the substance, it's about the process, right? So you want to take into consideration things like the therapeutic setting, the trained guides who facilitate the sessions. And one of my sayings is the set and the setting are crucial. The experience has got to take place in a controlled, safe environment with trained professionals who can guide individuals through the process and help them integrate the experience. That's key. Afterwards, after the treatment's actually done. So be very careful, make sure you're getting the proper professional support as you do it. This isn't something that I would ever recommend without trained support and reputable people taking you through that.
I see. So did any of your patients went through this process?
Not with the military. No.
Okay.
Now I do and have had individuals that I've worked with outside of the military who have explored the same and even post-service, and I've had seen mixed results.
I see.
So some people love it, and think it's great. I've seen people who have gone through it and then been great for a moment and then afterwards don't do well. And then I've seen people who they're like, it did absolutely nothing for me. It was just,
Really?
yeah. 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 So I've seen a full smattering of results.
I
Yeah.
see. That's extremely interesting because I mean it sounds like just a new tool. It's just like a new drug that can help people, not necessarily will, but can help. And I mean, if you're on one of those people that have not cured from PTSD yet and are looking for new avenues and feeling experimental, maybe that's something
Yeah.
you could try, and maybe it will help you. So that's very exciting for those individuals.
Yeah, I know for sure.
Yeah.
And, again, if you can do something that works for you, that's done in a safe and appropriate way, then I'm not going to stand in your way, but the thing that is really important to know is that you don't want to start a new habit that can potentially be habit forming, right? Or have additional issues get drummed up because now you're replacing one thing with another, right? So there's a lot. Again, I'm very, very cautionary when it comes to this. Yes, it can help. I've seen it help a lot of people in an appropriate and good way, and it is a possibility, but you have to do it properly, and it's not for everybody. Yeah.
That's very important. So that's another topic that you also cover. That's something that you help people with as well, right? Combating addiction or the
Yes.
stigma of addiction. So how
Mhm.
would you describe the stigma of addiction?
Oh gosh. I mean, like any other let's do, how much time do you have for that? The stigma of addiction, gosh, the biggest thing is, I think that if you are an addict, right, people think, or society has thought, that you are lesser than. People feel lesser than because they're worthy. Again, there's that sense of, self-esteem and of course doubt that goes along with that. So the biggest thing is there's a lack of understanding what addiction's about. Whenever there's a stigma, it's usually that stigma exists because people don't fully understand or educate themselves to what it's really about. And there's a lot of different models for addiction, which we're not going to go into today because I don't have the time for it. But what I will say is that it's a complex, multifaceted topic that has physiological, psychological, biological, societal, spiritual aspects that are all needing to be taken into consideration, like any other mental health issue, okay? Because it is a mental health issue. And I can't re-emphasize enough that we have to educate ourselves to it, that we have to understand it. So before you even jump into a stigma of it, like if you're feeling like there's, things going on, learn about it, understand it. So addiction isn't just a matter of choice or willpower. It's a chronic disorder that affects a person's reward system that impacts how they feel pleasure and motivation. Okay. You could be addicted to sugar, right? And there will be less of a stigma when compared to being addicted to a substance. But the mechanism in the brain is doing that. There's a reward system that's reinforcing these behaviors, these substances that people might be, inclined to using. So it's important to understand, what it's about.
I see. But again, there's so much hypocrisy because I think we are all kind of everyone's addicted to something. Like how many people drink like
Arguably,
10 cups of coffee per day? It's like, oh, it's just normal. No, it's not. You're addicted. But society sees as a
yeah,
normal thing, but it's addiction.
yeah.
I smartphone addiction. Like it's a thing as well. We don't consider it as that. Yeah, go ahead.
All of these are diagnosable. So there is
Really?
caffeine use disorder. There's technology diagnoses that you can have, and propensities that you can have. So we could discuss. I mean, addiction develops, and again, it takes a combination of things. You might be prone to it biologically, and that might make you have propensities. But there are also behavioral aspects like impulse and control issues that might start to factor in because of other emotional things that you're dealing with and combating, right? And then the minute you start to change your behaviors a certain way, simultaneous to that, there are neurobiological changes that happen up here that make it challenging for people to stop, even when they want to, right? So addiction isn't limited to substances like drugs or alcohol. There's behavioral addictions like gambling, internet use, exercise, even.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot that goes into it. So understanding the neurochemistry, the neurobiology of it, how substances or behaviors affect our neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, all of that is important to take into consideration because those systems create kind of an addictive system, if you will, that hijacks the brain's natural reward pathways. And that creates a cycle of seeking pleasure and avoiding, the negative stuff that happens if you try to stop, right? Because remember, like if you try to stop something, then there's withdrawal, there's negative out emotions, And nobody wants to feel those. So then what do? It just reinforces going back into the use of or the behavior of fill in the blank, right?
Got it. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, have you heard about the Rat Park experiment?
The rat park experiment? No, I'm not familiar with that.
So it's experiment they did with rats regarding addiction. I'm gonna read it real quick, the summary. So the Rat Park experiment was made by the psychologist Bruce Alexander in the 70s and showed that environment significantly affects addiction. So what he means by that, he put a bunch of rats in isolation and they had access to drug-laced water. And over time, they kind of became addicted to it. However, in the rat park, a large enriched environment with toys, other rats, and space room, the rats most. So that's another park. He made two parks, right? In this other park, all those rats they had more space, they had toys, and so they have like a better life, basically, a better environment. And in this better park, most rats avoided the drugged water and they prefer the normal water, so they have access to both waters. They all prefer the plain water. So the conclusion that the psychologist Bruce Alexander, well, his conclusion was that the addiction is heavily influenced by social and environmental factors, and not just by the substance itself. So. And yeah, and when he released those conclusions, like apparently was challenged. But anyway, but as you mentioned, like it's a societal problem. It's just like I think we understand this better now. And poor rats that they went through that. But I can imagine like you're isn't that Finland that has the one of the highest rates of alcoholism in the world because it's like dark all the time? It's your environment. It's like your rat in a shitty rat park. I'm sorry, no, Finland's not shitty. What I mean is like if you need sunlight as human, right? And if you don't get sunlight, like it kind of dysregulates something.
Well, yeah. I mean, I lived in Alaska for over 5 years, and yeah, yeah. And like, there's literally, it's interesting. There are many groups that probably do this, but the National Pediatric Association literally draws a line across the United States and says, if you're above this line, that means you're getting less sunlight, which means that you've got to kind of protect yourself and make sure that you're, getting the right vitamin D dosages, to be able to function well and nicely. Now, interestingly enough, I think it's really important to take into consideration a person's likes, dislikes, propensities. I myself personally am not really a sunlight person, so when I was living in Alaska, right, I was like, oh yeah, winter, this rocks. 4 hours of daylight and the rest of the time is like dark. My brain is like ready to go. And I blame grad school for that because I would spend many, many late nights doing research and pulling all-nighters and, doing all the work that needed to go into it. So nighttime is like my time to thrive and like to really come up with all the creative stuff. And I've seen a lot of replicas of the Rat Park study itself, where it's proving exactly that setting makes a difference, right? What is accessible to a person makes a difference. And so knowing this now, that's how I functioned in Alaska, right? I was thriving without the sunlight, but I needed to make sure that my husband and my children were okay because I've got some babies, who need that sunlight, and I've got a husband who likes the daytime, so we had to take precautions. And similarly, if you, think you have a propensity towards a certain liking or dislike, whatever, take that into consideration, whether it's about treatment, whether it's about, just general self-care, whether it's about how you like to thrive, take that into consideration. So yeah. I mean, I think, and I've seen people who will live in areas that might not have as much sunlight and not do well at all, and need that support and treatment. And again, like myself, I'm more of the person who likes the darker times. So if I'm in a more sunny environment, I thrive in the days that are cloudy and, rocking it when it's cloudy out there. But we all do need balance, right? That's, I think, what the takeaway message is whatever the propensities are, it's important to have balance.
I see. Balance. That's so interesting. And it also comes back to what we were talking earlier, that everyone's a little bit different. Everyone's needs are a little bit different. Why you thrive in the darkness? Some people won't. Like everyone's different. So you lived in Alaska. You just decided to drop that now. That's so interesting.
Yeah, my favorite place ever. I'm originally from Michigan. I was born and brought up there. And then first big move out of Michigan was going to Alaska. And, I can't say enough about it. I'm probably like the walking advertisement for the state. Myself and my husband, even my kids, we really, really enjoyed ourselves there. It was beautiful. It's beautiful. You just walk outside, whatever debriefing you need to do, you just get your sense of Zen from looking around you and just breathing in the clean air. It's a magnificent place to be. Yeah.
Wow. I'm jealous now. It's on my bucket list. One day I go to Alaska. So,
Yeah.
Doctor, so before anything, Finnish people, I love you. Don't get mad. You know what I mean? So, Dr. Mala, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Do you have any final remarks, any final message that you'd like to leave with, to us?
Well, no matter what you're going through, remember that there is hope. There is recovery that is possible if you're needing to recover. And just take it one step at a time. Take it one day at a time, and reach out. Don't think that you have to do this by yourself. You don't need to. There is support. There is hope. There's light. And all you got to do is take that first step. So take it one step at a time, and know that when you reach out, that is a very brave and courageous thing to do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Mala. Where people can find you, please tell us your TikTok, your website.
Yeah, my handle is at the official Dr. Mala, and you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Insta. And then my website, which is drmala.net. All of my contact information is also there.
Perfect. Dr. Mala, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
It was amazing. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. You know what? It's giveaway time. Are you ready to snag some exclusive Brewcast gear? Well, listen up. We're giving away a limited edition Brewcast cap. Again, we already gave one, and now that's the second one. It's super easy to enter. You have to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then that's it. You will be then running to win this awesome cap. But don't wait too long. Subscribe now, because as always, our giveaways won't last forever. We'll be announcing the lucky winner for this amazing Brewcast cap at the end of January 2025. I said 2024 before. This is at the end of January 2025, next year. So stay tuned. Good luck to everyone, and thanks so much for being an amazing part of the Brewcast community. And once again, subscribe, and that's it. What an amazing episode. Thanks again, everyone. See you next time. Dr. Mala, again, was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. Check out now the Brewcast store, Explore store, filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with Brewcast. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Buy now at brew-cast.com/store. Again, that's brew-cast.com/store. Link on the description below. Be a Brewcast model and get free stuff. We'd love to see how you and your loved ones enjoy Brewcast. Snap a picture of yourself, your family, your friends, or even your pets wearing Brewcast merch, or watching an episode of the show, and send it to us and become part of Brewcast. We'll feature you and your pictures at the end of every episode, just like the ones you're seeing on the screen right now. You can upload your pictures at brew-cast.com/contact or tag us on social media. Alright everyone, it has been a pleasure, thank you so much and see you next time. Bye bye.